Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched season 3 of The Crown on Netflix. Let's talk about it. So if you've watched my Downton Abbey review, you would probably know that I am not the biggest royalist in the world. However, when it comes to The Crown, all bets are off. I adore this series. I love this series so much. I think it's one of the best shows that Netflix has. It is incredible, and I don't think that you need to be a royalist in order to appreciate it either. Going into this season, I was so excited but also apprehensive for multiple reasons. Firstly, you have a 2-year gap between season 2 and season 3, which left people waiting anxiously to see what was to come next. Then you have the fact that you have a brand new cast, the brand new guard replacing the old. And it was such a tall order to be able to deliver because that old cast was incredible. I adored Claire Foy as the Queen. Whenever I think of the young Queen Elizabeth now, I just think of Claire Foy because she's so good at depicting this character, this person that's so distant from us yet so ever present in especially British society. I think she did an excellent job. Anyway, this is not a review of seasons 1 to 2 of The Crown, but let me just say it was a tall order for me to be able to replicate or even exceed the success of seasons 1 to 2 in my eyes. And I have to say that season 3 kind of does it. It does for the most part, and we'll get into it. This is probably going to be a pretty long video, but I do think that there are a few shortcomings that I would like to see improved upon when season 4 hits soon. So without further ado, let's get into this review. It will be a spoiler review. I'm going to be going in deep with this show because I love it so much and I love talking about it, and I can't wait to share my thoughts with you guys. The first things first, I usually like to address some of the technical elements in TV shows and films because I want to give them props. I want to give them a shout out because they're so important, particularly when it comes to period films where you have a completely different world that you are asking the viewer to become a part of. And so here with The Crown, we're dealing with the 1960s to 70s. They are able to realize this period of time in this specific environment so well through the costuming, the product design. Everything is just impeccable. I absolutely love that about the first 2 seasons, and I see it again here. I would say that there was a slight diminishing of the glitz and glamour that we saw in the first 2 seasons, especially as Elizabeth kind of gets within her role and it becomes a bit more routine, and we'll talk about that later on. But just in terms of the costumes, there were fewer like glitzy and glamorous costumes that she was wearing. It's not really the main meat and potatoes of the show. It's just like the cherry on top that I enjoy. But I will say that the costumes that they did have, it transported you straight into the 60s, 70s. I think they looked absolutely impeccable. I like how the costume designers usually go back and forth between real life historically accurate costuming versus costumes that are inspired or in spirit of the actual characters, as well as a collaboration with the actors. Overall, The Crown is reportedly one of the most expensive productions that Netflix has, and it definitely shows. They do not waste a single penny because on screen it comes across beautifully. It is a lavish show to watch, and it's a pleasure to watch as a result. Now let's get into some of the story beats of this season. Now, what I really enjoy about this show is that it's not just about the royal family. They are the core, they are the central point, but actually the show very cleverly uses them as a sort of looking glass to see the different socio-economical, socio-political situations within different times of the Queen's reign. And this season we reached the 1960s, where there's just an abundance of material to draw from. And I have to say, before we get into what was present, I'd like to highlight what wasn't and what really stuck out to me, and that is the fall of the British Empire as it was at the beginning of Elizabeth's reign. Now, at this time in the 1960s, the post-war era, after World War II, there are a ton of former British colonies that are gaining independence, and that's kind of touched upon in the first 2 seasons, where you see, the portrait of Elizabeth being taken down in Ghana, and African leaders kind of standing up and saying, we no longer want to be under British rule. That is kind of addressed in the background. I thought that in season 3 that would come to a head because a ton of countries gained their independence, and it's a really big deal for the royal family because, of course, the monarch in the past was seen as the emperor, the emperor of India, and that no longer exists. The Queen is still the head of state of a lot of Commonwealth countries, but I still find it a bit bizarre that they didn't really explore how that came about and how those arrangements were made. They didn't really explore that aspect at all. And again, I just found that to be a missed opportunity, because you just have a bunch of countries gaining independence from British rule, at the top of which is the Queen, and it's not really commented on during this season, even though this is at the peak of what was happening. So that was something that I was a bit disappointed by, because it would have added a bit more nuance to the story and added more of a global outlook on the royal family and how their roles changed throughout the 20th century. Now on to the events that actually were explored in season 3, and first things first, my least favorite episode this season was Moondust, because what on earth does the moon landing have to do with the royal family? How do we know for a fact that Prince Philip got this midlife crisis just as the moon landing was taking place, and he felt like he was missing out on living his best life because he was married to the Queen when he saw those astronauts? Like, how do we know that for a fact? One. And two, why does it matter? It was this episode that I couldn't help but think, this is wasted. Like, there are so many other special events that happened during this period, just like I was saying about the fall of the British Empire, that were just completely amiss, when you have this one here that's just so unnecessary. It has nothing to do with the royal family. It just felt like it came out of nowhere. Now, maybe it was to appeal to the American audience, but they already had an episode where Margaret went on a tour of America and she got to the White House and had a dinner with President Johnson. So it wasn't necessary to double dip on that front. And it was just such a weird episode to have amongst all of the others that are so central to the British experience and to the royal family's part in it. I also wasn't the biggest fan of episode 5, called Coup, where Earl Mountbatten is approached in order to form this whole alliance going against the democratically elected Labour government. This season wasn't very pro-Labour. It was definitely an interesting episode on the side of, you know, the Earl Mountbatten situation. But the Queen Elizabeth side of things was just a bit drab. You see her, you know, horse hunting and researching about racing horses. And I get that that's a big part of her life and her interests. But we already explored that in the previous seasons. We already established that this is probably what she would have been doing had she not become queen. So I don't think, again, we need to double dip on that front too many times, especially not to dedicate half an episode on this. Even though I did like the ending where, you know, she's dreaming about the possibilities of racehorsing and then she has to crash land back into reality because she's heard about this coup going on, and she has to, you know, sort that situation out, because at the end of the day she is the queen and she's got a job to do. Finally, Dangling Man also was a bit problematic for me as well. Not really because of the construction of the episode. I actually found it to be very engaging. It was very smooth. The only problem that I had with this episode is that they seem to have forgotten that the former King Edward VIII / the Duke of Windsor was a freaking Nazi. Like, just trash person on that front. And they seem to have completely forgotten it, even though they were the ones that educated me on this subject matter and I had to do research afterwards. But seeing that live footage of the actual Duke that was included in this series, it's unforgettable. You know, I could never look at that family in the same way again. So for them to kind of dust that under the rug for this season was so weird. And in this episode, Elizabeth forgives him for some of his trespasses, for some of his actions. And some of those trespasses are things that she can forgive him for, like the fact that he turned her life upside down when he abdicated in order to marry his wife. But the fact that he was a Nazi isn't something that she can forgive him for and absolve him of. So the fact that they tried to kind of establish that he died, you know, peacefully after having gotten that forgiveness, I disagreed wholeheartedly with that side of the story. And they even drew parallels between the Duke of Windsor's story and Charles's story, which I found to be a bit problematic, especially because the Duke of Windsor was a Nazi, but also because of the ultimate ending of Charles's story. I find that to be kind of bizarre that they would try to link those two characters together, because his story actually had such a tragic ending. But it's not all negative, because I really did enjoy this season overall, and there are a few episodes in here that I think are just some of the best episodes ever made in any TV show. And number one is Aberfan. Now, I probably butchered that name, and apologies if I did, but I had no idea about this tragic, horrific disaster that happened in a small village in Wales, where you have a predominantly, mining industry presence there, and these huge mountains just made up of waste material from coal mining. When tragedy strikes and this huge sludgy avalanche just obliterates an entire primary school, it is brutal to watch. It is so sad to see those kids just huddle under the table. You see the fear in the teacher's eyes as he realizes that this is an uncontrollable disaster, that he has absolutely no idea what to do. The construction of this episode was just so excellent, because at first you just have the introduction of these kids living their ordinary lives. They're practicing their song for their school assembly, which everyone can relate to, especially if you're from the UK. We all know those primary school assemblies where you have to sing a song. And after school, you just see the kids running back home. They're getting ready for their assembly the next day. They're diligently singing out the lyrics, and their parents are there with them, supporting them. And you just feel that sense of community, that sense of love and affection for these kids. And everyone is just looking out for one another, and the neighborhood just feels so connected. In that just very brief snapshot of the village itself, we get all of this. And so when we are hit with the events that happen, with the tragedy that happens, it's all the more impactful, to the point where someone like me, who's just so distanced from this event, I'd never heard of it before, it happened way before my time, don't live in that kind of environment, etc. It doesn't matter, because it just appeals to my sense of humanity. It was so well done that everything just felt so real, so sad, and just so it was an incredible episode, truly. I think if any of the episodes this season are going to be nominated for an Emmy, I think it should definitely be that one. And I think that's where this show shines the most, is when they take the opportunity to highlight events that may have been forgotten throughout history and really teach the viewer something, just like they did, I think, in season 1 with the Great Fog of London. I had no idea about that, but that was such an impactful event because it changed a lot of the pollution laws in the city, etc. So that sort of thing really excites me and it really intrigues me, and I think it adds something extra to The Crown that is separate from just an ordinary kind of documentary style type movie about the royal family specifically. Speaking of the royal family themselves, of course, this season saw the departure of the old cast from seasons 1 to 2. A new cast came along to step up to the plate, and I thought I'd go through some of the performances right here, starting of course with the Queen herself, Elizabeth II, now portrayed by Olivia Colman. I really like Olivia Colman. I thought she was fantastic in The Favourite, a role which she won the Academy Award just this year. I also really enjoyed her in The Night Manager, starring Tom Hiddleston, which is where I was first introduced to her. I know she's done plenty of other things, but I don't watch a lot of British television, so that's where I know her from. But I have to say, I was slightly disappointed with her portrayal of Lilibet this season. And honestly, it doesn't have anything to do with her acting ability. I am no one to be criticizing Olivia Colman's acting ability. She's phenomenal. But I think it has more to do with the writing of the character this season, because actually Queen Elizabeth doesn't have much to do this season, which was very surprising to me. Again, especially because you have the entire fall of the empire in the background, but I digress. Overall, I sometimes felt like Olivia Colman's portrayal of Elizabeth came from a perceived vision of what Queen Elizabeth is like, versus following on the actual portrayal of Lilibet from this show by Claire Foy. She seemed just a bit too stoic. And that's the main reason why I think this. I think Claire Foy did a great job of giving Elizabeth a few more personality traits, a few more character quirks that went beyond our perception of the Queen. But when it came to Olivia's portrayal of the Queen, she very much stuck to the regalness of her personality and the kind of stoicism of her personality as well, which I think works for public appearances, and especially when that's addressed, her lack of emotionality is addressed during the Aberfan episode. I think it works there, but in some cases it doesn't quite work, because the relationships between her children and her husband and her other members of the family, they don't seem as effortless, they don't seem as genuine as they did in the first 2 seasons, because the way that she interacts with them is the same way that she interacts with a public figure. So to me, that was a bit odd. And I'm saying this as someone who, I'm not like a royal historian by any means, but whenever The Crown comes around, I do put on my royal historian hat. I watch a ton of documentaries, I look at a ton of pictures of the royal family, stalk them for a bit, and then it kind of gets out of my system. So I've seen a ton of pictures of the Queen during this period, and she was a bit more smiley, a bit more cheerful than Olivia Colman's portrayal would have you believe. This season also gave us Helena Bonham-Carter as Princess Margaret. Now, personally, I've never been the biggest fan of Princess Margaret in this series. I've never sympathized with her. I've never really related to her. She just seems like such an unreachable character in my eyes. And I think that is the purpose of her, because that is the way that she was in real life, according to some reports. So I understand that that is the character of Princess Margaret in The Crown, is that she's not as relatable. She's a bit haughty, she's a bit up herself. So the depiction of the character by Vanessa Kirby is not really a problem with me. It's just that I don't really connect to her. But as a result, I did feel a bit iffy about the fact that they tried to double down on this character during this season. I think Helena Bonham Carter was great as Princess Margaret. She embodied that character, that kind of arrogance, but also that loneliness, that isolation so well. And I think her interactions with Elizabeth were perfect, were fantastic. They had that same energy that Vanessa and Claire had in the previous season. But at the same time, the character of Margaret just seems a bit incomplete, because whilst they focus on her a lot during this season, they don't really give us the full picture. For example, her children, her kids never really play a role in her life. They seem very distant, you know, taken care of by the nanny. Maybe that's how it was, but they don't really address that. They don't really address her familial setup, you know, aside from just her relationship with her husband, which was clearly very turbulent. Also, I happen to know a bit about Margaret because I did watch a documentary on her in preparation for season 3, and it mentions several rumoured affairs, which they definitely leave out during the season. They kind of sanitize a few things. Again, the Nazi thing, the Empire thing, the Margaret thing. I definitely felt like this season was a bit more sanitized when it came to its approach towards the royal family, a bit more deferential, I guess, but that's not really what I want from this show. Tobias Menzies replaces Matt Smith as Philip, and I think he is perfectly cast for this role. In contrast with Olivia, I definitely think that he was studying, he was procuring every single characteristic of Matt Smith's version of Philip, and then taking into account the different stage in life that this person is in at this point in time, and just creating this beautiful hybrid of a human being that perfectly, I think, portrays the character of the Duke of Edinburgh. I definitely enjoyed Tobias Menzies' performance as Philip. I think he was excellent. He had that dry wit to him, that sarcasm and that snarkiness, but it was kind of amped up a level because he was getting older and a bit grouchier and had regrets and etc, etc. And whilst I did not love that episode about the moon landing, because I thought it was largely irrelevant, I did enjoy his performance quite a bit. Princess Anne, I think, was excellently cast. I really liked her performance. She was a bit in the background here because she's obviously not front and center when it comes to the hierarchy of the royal family, but I loved her snarkiness as well. She very much has similar characteristics to Philip, and I really enjoyed their dynamic, especially because it was always there. There was always that level of favoritism that Philip had towards Anne, even when she was very young, and so for that to carry on and for that to kind of manifest itself into Anne having certain character traits that are just like Philip, I think makes perfect sense, and I think it was very well done. I also really liked Josh O'Connor's depiction of Prince Charles. Now, I'm not very familiar with Prince Charles or his story. I am familiar with the whole Princess Diana situation and that love triangle, which we see the beginnings of this season. I didn't love the actress that played Camilla, although that's probably not an accident. So for me, it's always been in the background, in the press and in just society in Britain, but it's never been something that I've been like very interested in. So I'm interested to see how they tell this story in the next few seasons. But other than that, I like the portrayal of Prince Charles. He was just so awkward and kind of pathetic, and I think a tad more likable than the actual Prince Charles, if I may say so. And then you have a few more replacements rounding out the cast this season. So of course you have Charles Dance as Earl Mountbatten, which I thought was great. I think he was excellent in that role. It was perfect for him, and he definitely has more to do this season than he's ever had before. I think mostly because he's Charles Dance, but also because you have that whole coup situation. Another switch that we have is the replacement of Victoria Hamilton with Marion Bailey portraying the Queen Mother. And actually, surprisingly, I have a lot to say about this one because I wasn't a big fan of the Queen Mother this season. I thought she just turned into a completely different type of character. The Queen Mother in the previous seasons was entirely different in my opinion. The way that she held herself in a very regal, very traditionalist way was very distinct for me. Whereas in this season, she seems very cheerful, which I think the Queen Mother is known for being, cheerful and sociable. Again, don't know much about her, but I've gathered that at least. And that definitely made sense in Marion's portrayal of her. But what didn't make sense is that she seemed also a bit airheaded. She seemed away with the fairies sometimes, especially during Margaret's birthday where they have that whole dinner and the Queen Mother is supporting Tony Armstrong-Jones even though Margaret has made it clear that he's probably off cheating on her as they speak. I just found it a bit weird how she was depicted at that moment because she was just very away with the fairies and very naive. And I know that in real life, I think the Queen did side with her son-in-law quite a bit during their whole turbulent relationship with Margaret. But her whole approach to that just seemed a bit too naive for me because in the first 2 seasons, the Queen Mother is cunning. Like, she has plans, she's directing the situation behind the scenes, she's on that. And this season, there's definitely some of that, especially with Charles and Camilla, but her personality is just entirely different. The old Queen Mother had this whole thing about how she hated the way that the royal family was going down, kind of lowering themselves in order to appease the public, and where's the regality and where is the deference. Whereas this season, they have a whole episode about exposing their entire lives on television, and she just seems perfectly okay with it. She's like, yeah, great, where do I sit? Oh, the lights are a bit bright. That's not the same character that I came to know, at least. I don't know about you guys. Finally, I just wanted to highlight a new addition to the cast this season, and that was Jason Watkins portraying Harold Wilson, the Labour leader. And at first, I was a bit unsure about his choices in the role because he just seemed so weird and unsociable and just unapproachable. But when I saw real life footage of the actual Prime Minister, I was like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. I actually think that portrayal was fantastic. So just wanted to give him a shout out right here at the end of my review. Overall, I have to say, this is, like I said at the beginning, one of the best shows on television right now. I love this show, and that is why I have so much to say about it. It's so hard for me to form a whole dissertation, like a 5-page dissertation on my notes. I've been talking for an hour about a show that I don't care about a show that I just think is fine. But when I have a show that I really do care about and a show that I think is absolutely fantastic for all these different reasons, that's when I start talking a ton. And that's definitely where I think The Crown lands. And that is why, despite the fact that there are a few things that I took issue with, like I said earlier, I would definitely consider this show to be still one of the best. And season 3 did not overall disappoint. Therefore, I'm going to give The Crown season 3 an 8 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys what I thought of season 3 of The Crown, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the show down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.